Good morning, everyone. This is the Vintage Sewing Machine Garage, and I wanted to make a quick video today, and well, hopefully it'll be quick. You know how I am when I get to talking about these machines. I wanted to talk to you about brand. I often get quite a lot of questions from folks on sewing machine brands and even sewing machine models. They'll ask me, because they know I've restored quite a few domestic sewing machines from the vintage era, and they'll ask me, hey, what's the best machine? What's your favorite machine? And that question is impossible to answer. And it's not because I'm ducking the question, it's because there is not one single answer to this. And it's a good thing, because you will find lots of different opinions on the internet or anywhere about what is the best machine. And the reason for that is quite simply, sewing machines were designed to do a number of things, particularly, of course, domestic or home sewing machines, because many families, they may have had one sewing machine that were very expensive. A lot of families had to make payments on them before they paid them off, like making a car payment. And so, these machines had to be flexible. And and I'll pan over here, I was showing you folks the Marrow that I just got, the industrial overlock machine. Unlike industrial machines, which are highly specialized, and I mean super specialized, home sewing machines, they really had to be super flexible. They had to sew everything from baby clothes. There were times in history where people sewed lots of lace. They might have a silk handkerchief or a scarf, and then they would have to adjust the settings on the machine because they had to sew heavy drapery fabrics. And so a lot of times people will look at a home domestic sewing machine, like all the vintage ones you see here. This is not all of my inventory, but I just put up a sampling of brands that I've got right now. And so people will often, they'll often say, what's the best? Think about the types of things you are going to be sewing, the types of sewing projects that you would like to work on. And that's kind of how you would start the search. Let's say maybe you already have sewing machines and you want a vintage model, or maybe you have no sewing machine. Maybe you're new. I get a lot of people who have never sewn a stitch before, and they're so interested and excited. And many of them will go to, they'll start looking to one of the vintage models, in part because in some ways they might be simpler to learn. There's less automated features in them, but they're also less complicated. If you think of an old car from 20 years ago to some of the new cars today, which have all the computers in them. So what you're looking at here, folks, is basically the three, let's see, 1, 2, 3. There are 4 brands here, and I'm, the Marrow is sort of an outlier. It's the first industrial I've decided to purchase and own myself. I'm going to be using it. And just a heads up, later this summer, my plan is to learn to sew. And that will hopefully provide some information for those of you, if you're new to sewing like I am. Like I say, I've been doing sewing machine restoration for almost 9 years, I think. But sewing, other than patching or mending or putting a button on or something, my sewing skill is something I want to increase. And I have some ideas for projects I want to work on. So if any of you watching are experienced at sewing, hopefully you'll share with your comments on how I might improve my skills. And for those of you who do not, you will watch and possibly laugh. It may end up being a comedy channel after all when you see me start to learn to sew. But in any case, I wanted to talk to you about the brands. You see, I actually was thinking about this video, and I thought, well, what's my current inventory at the moment? And I have, I'll just tell you, they're not. I can't get them all in this shot here in front of the camera, but I'll give you an inventory list. I have one Kenmore, which you see over on the far left. I have one Necky, which you see right in the center. And I have, let's see, I have 4 white machines. You see one of them there. That one is yet another white branded sewing machine made in Japan. And one of the 4 white models I've got is the rotary that I was talking about the other day, and I believe I did a video on the friction rubber pulley replacement, and I'll be doing more videos on that machine as well. In fact, I bought that machine specifically so I could do rotary videos because there's so few of them out there. So as you can see, I've got, now this inventory balance will shift at times. Well, I forgot to mention, I have over a dozen Singer machines in my inventory. Now, whether you are looking to purchase a vintage machine, whether you are new to sewing or not, you may have a room full of new sewing machines and you want a vintage model, or some of you are interested in tinkering and learning how to restore vintage sewing machines. Whatever your interest is, keep in mind that everything I'm basically describing to you is something that can change over time. Sometimes I might have 3 or 4 Neckies, or I may have a half dozen Kenmores. But overall, I will say that in the entire 9 years, going on 9 years, I've been doing this hobby of restoring and bringing back old vintage machines. I would say Singer has been the majority of those that I've worked on. Now, there are different reasons for this. First of all, Singer was the largest company by far. They were the General Motors or Toyota of the sewing world, and they had factories all over the planet. They were the largest producer of sewing machines in the world for quite a few decades, for a good part of their history. And so Singer machines are, and there are exceptions to all of this. There are always certain models, you can't find stuff for. But out of all the brands that I have ever tinkered with, Singers are the easiest and the fastest to find parts for, either vintage parts, spares, salvaged from other machines, or reproduction. And you folks have seen me talk about in my parts video, you can get reproduction electrical cords for Singer machines that haven't been produced in a half century. You can still get reproduction new cords. And the reason for that is there are so many of these old Singers still out there. Now, the Necki that you see in front of you is an exception. It's a European brand. These were made in Italy. When you're dealing with European brands, such as the German Pfaffs, the Swiss Berninas, and I'm sure there are others we could talk about, but of all the European brands, the Neckis are slightly, ever so slightly, more practical for me to get parts for, although there are exceptions. And I'm working on finding a needle bar clamp with a thread guide, because the thread guide on this little Necki BCJ, little junior Necki there, has broken off, and I need to find that part because I know I want it to sew properly. When I do a restoration, I want my machine to function like it was brand new. And then you've seen in my video on cleaning machines, I love to clean them and buff them with oil, but I tend to leave the old patina on there. I don't strip them. I want them to be restored and functioning like new, and they will have a little patina depending on how they were used, how much they were used. But with the exception of the Necki brand, most of your European brands you can get spare parts for, and sometimes you can get reproduction parts such as electrical cords for some of the Pfaffs, the German-made machines. But they are more difficult to come by. You could go to eBay, for example, and do a search for vintage Pfaff or Pfaff, if I'm not pronouncing this word correctly, I apologize. And when you do a search on eBay, you're going to find, you can find some, but not a lot. If you put Singer, the pages go on and on, right? Now with the Kenmores, remember Kenmore was and still is a brand of Sears products. I don't believe they do sewing machines under that name anymore. But of course, Sears never made sewing machines. They would contract with a supplier. For many years, it was the White Sewing Company that made Sears machines. But by the 60s, White lost the Sears contract. And so all of those rotary machines that you can get parts for, because they were made in huge numbers, those of you, and I've mentioned this in my other videos, those of you who have rotary machines made by the White Company, and it could be under their name, it could be Franklin, Kenmore, Dressmaster, etc., those machines you can find parts for because they were made for long periods, I mean decades, And a lot of the designs were the same. They didn't make a lot of changes. Once you get into the 60s and 70s with Kenmore's, parts availability changes. Some of the models I can easily find parts for. Others I have to hunt a little bit more. Depends on how popular a model it was for Sears. Because Sears was such a powerful retailer back in the day, though, if you were going to find parts for a Japanese-made machine, other than basically the White brand, and the one on the right there, of course, was made in Japan. At this point, White was outsourcing to Japan for their production. If it's a White brand machine or a Kenmore from the 60s made in Japan, your chances of finding parts are higher, not as much as Singer, but they're still better than many of the private label Japanese brands. Now, a lot of these Japanese clones, I have restored many of them, and they are fantastic machines. You can buy them for very little. They use class 15 bobbin cases and bobbins, and sometimes their check springs. Some of their parts are interchangeable, right? They didn't reinvent the wheel there. But if it's a specific part that you need, and you see the specific parts getting more custom tailored to machine designs as we moved into the 70s, and then of course the last of the all metal machines were made, you will find that parts availability for Singers is the easiest. I would say probably followed by Kenmore and White, and then the European brands come up behind. That doesn't mean you shouldn't care for or restore a European brand machine. If you've ever used a German Pfaff or an Italian Necchi, you know what I'm speaking of. Bernina, you can get parts for a number of their machines. They are very expensive, and they're not as plentiful as those for Singers. If you are thinking about starting the hobby of restoring vintage sewing machines, and you want something that would be relatively simple to get parts for, I would suggest a Singer 15 class machine. They were built for almost 70 years. I mean, we're talking a long production run. They made a few changes here and there, but in terms of just learning how to work on machines, you've seen some of my videos on the Singer 115s and many of the Singer 15 class machines. They are a joy to work on, and they're not too overwhelming when you're just getting started. So that's where I would start. But again, you can see sort of an overview here. Again, my inventory changes. I would say of all the machines I have ever restored, and the numbers keep going up, I would say I have restored more Singers than anything else, just because there are more of them. And they made a lot of really wonderful models, a lot of popular ones. That's followed by Kenmore and White, because the White company was the Singer's biggest competitor, and Kenmore was sold through Sears. And once upon a time, as many of you may know or not know, Sears and Roebuck was an amazing retailer once upon a time. So anyway, folks, I hope this helps. Again, you will. One other thing to mention to you is that most vintage sewing machines in North America were flatbeds. Everything you see here is a flatbed machine, except for the Kenmore. It's a convertible or free arm machine, and of course the left side. Let's zoom in here, and I'll show you the left side of the machine. Of course, it comes off. When I do a video on the Kenmore, I'll show you more about how that works. But basically, you can use it as a flatbed machine or as a free arm, or it converts to a free arm machine, and there are advantages to using it. And the free arm has a lot of advantages depending on the kind of sewing you do. If you do a lot of clothing and hemming, you might want a free arm. But yeah, when you're looking at vintage machines, just in terms of brands, I would say the ones that are easiest to find parts for in North America are Singers. And that, again, followed by White and Kenmore. So there you go, folks. That's the order that I've put the brands in terms of ease of finding parts. Many of the Singers, particularly as you go back in time, I find them more service friendly, because Singer employed a lot of the people who serviced their machines, and so they had a vested interest in making servicing more time efficient, because it was just less costly for the company. And I have noticed over the years, I can see changes in the engineering of Singer machines where they, the 301 there that you see as compared to the earlier potted motors, taking a motor out of a Singer 301 or a Singer Slant Series is a relatively quick and efficient procedure as compared to some of the other brands, which can get quite, they're not impossible, they're just more time consuming. This is particularly true of European brands. So if they have motors that are encased inside of them. So anyway, you can see my list here. I hope this is helpful. If any of you have ideas or comments about your own experience with vintage sewing machine brands, and again, I'm talking about home machines. I didn't put the Mero in here because it's an industrial. It's kind of a whole nother category. But let me know what you think. This is based on almost 9 years of working at this hobby and tinkering with machines. I love all of these brands. To finally answer your question, I don't have a favorite because it really depends on what you're sewing. If you said, hey, tell me what your favorite machine is, I'm going to answer your question with another question. What are you doing? Are you sewing garments? You would probably benefit from a free arm machine, whether it's a Kenmore or a different brand. And then, of course, if you're a quilter and you really, really want a super ultra refined stitch, any machine that has a rotary shuttle hook, such as the Singer 301, the Singer Featherweight, Singer 201, but of course the White and Kenmore rotaries make unbelievably beautiful stitches as well. If you wanted something to sew really heavy fabrics, but you're still looking at a domestic machine, some of the Neckies are some of the toughest. The early Neckies, those from the late 40s, early 50s, are some of the toughest machines I've ever seen. So again, it just depends on what kind of project you have. And I think if you were thinking about getting one of these vintage machines, that's what I would do. I would start with what is it you think you're going to sew on, and then go from there and look for you can look for a type of model and then look at the brands and see what you find. If you can find someone in your area, if you're not a tinkerer and you want someone to overhaul it, even before you buy a machine, go to a sewing machine dealer and see if you can find someone who will work on them for you, and that might help you in your decision in terms of what brand to buy. So anyway, folks, I'll end it here. You know I like to ramble on, but I really wanted to give you my impression. I don't have favorites in brands. I have favorite brands and models depending on the sewing, but all of these brands are excellent. They're all heirloom quality, and I think any of them would serve you well depending on what your needs are. Thanks for watching, and I'll look for your comments below.